Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, domestic suspense. I want to talk to you about Deep Water by Patricia Highsmith. So if I was to say that this is a book about a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who tries to escape that marriage through drink and kind of partying and flirtation and things like that, but whose husband is overbearing and violent, you might think that that sounded like a very modern book. So I can, certainly if you go into a bookshop nowadays, you see racks and racks of this kind of domestic thriller that have similar storylines to that. So books that are, suspense novels, but very much focused around a relationship. So I think Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, really kick-started the current wave of that kind of book. But there are loads of authors who write that kind of thing. I think Colleen Hoover is a big name at the moment, but people like B.A. Paris and authors like that as well. So there's a lot of it about at the moment, and it seems to be, hugely successful. And I have to confess, it's a subgenre that I haven't paid too much attention to. So I've read Gone Girl, and I did really enjoy that. But the other books I've read, including one by B.A. Paris, I didn't really enjoy. So I didn't like Girl on a Train. I didn't like the B.A. Paris book I read, which I think was called Behind Closed Doors or something like that. I've tried a couple of other ones and just didn't get on with them. And as a result of those, kind of failed reads, I've kind of tended to avoid that kind of book more recently. Now, this book by Patricia Highsmith 100% falls into this subgenre. The difference being, as you can probably tell by the copy I'm holding, and if you're familiar with the name Patricia Highsmith, this is a much older book. So this book came out in 1957, so it's over 65 years old. But it still explores a lot of those themes of kind of relationships gone bad, and I guess that it's a perennially, if I can get the word out, a perennially interesting theme, isn't it? Because most of us end up in relationships. Those relationships don't always go as we plan, and so the notion of almost like role-playing different ways that relationships could go bad through fiction is something that's probably quite appealing to people, and maybe to an extent, just as people read romance in order to think about, to dream about a perfect relationship, maybe people read this kind of book to reflect on the fact that maybe their relationship isn't so bad after all. I might be grossly overgeneralizing there, but you get the idea. So this is a really, really interesting and powerful book, and it feels like a much more modern book that it is. So I've talked about the fact that it explores very similar themes to modern books. One of the other things that's really striking in this book is that the marriage at the centre of it is basically an open marriage. So Melinda, who's the wife, is able to pursue other relationships within the marriage. Vic, who's her husband, who is a doting father, so they've got a daughter, and Vic does, seems to do most of the childcare, which again feels like quite a modern thing. Vic apparently is okay with his wife's dalliances and doesn't seem to raise objections to them, until he starts telling people that he murdered one of her previous lovers. So one of her previous lovers had been killed, and nobody knows who did it. And Vic starts telling people right at the start of the book. He starts telling people at a party that it was him, and leaving them to wonder whether it was actually him or not. And the suspense and kind of tension of the book grows from there, as it becomes apparent that Vic does harbour some resentment, and is not afraid to express that resentment through action. And what's really striking about this book is how that suspense builds up, and how Vic, as the perpetrator of these crimes, effectively, is almost accepted. So people seem to just turn a blind eye to the things that he's doing because he's a man and because he's a very respected member of the community. Now, I'm not going to say too much more than that about the plot for fear of spoiling it, But there's definitely something in this book about men's ability to get away with things that women can't get away with, and also the fact that society is instinctively distrustful of women who say that they've been wronged, as Melinda does in this book. So that's kind of the plot and the setup. What really struck me about this book, though, was that, as I say, the plot and the story and the characters are very similar to characters you might see in in a modern domestic suspense thriller. And I tend not to like modern domestic suspense thrillers. So I was trying to think about what is it that makes this book different? What does this book do so well that made me absolutely love it? So I gave this book 5 stars, with no hesitation at all. As people who watch the channel will know, I'm reading through Patricia Highsmith's work at the moment. This is, I think, the 5th book I've read by her, and it's my favourite so far. And there hasn't been a bad book yet, but this one was definitely better than the others. So what is it about it that really appealed to me? And I think there's 2 things. So one is just the quality of the writing is excellent. So Patricia Highsmith was an incredibly good writer, really taught in terms of her prose. So, you can see it's not a very long book. She doesn't waste any time getting into the meat of the story. And, that scene where Vic, claims to have murdered one of her previous lovers is right at the start of the book. So immediately it grabs you and you get to see, their relationship and the problems with their relationship. But he doesn't waste time, Patricia Highsmith doesn't waste time moving the plot along. So there's that. And her prose is just excellent. And to an extent, I think, timeless as well. So there is stuff in here that dates it, definitely. It definitely feels at time like a 50s book, and there's all these kind of 50s cocktail parties going on and things like that. But at the same time, it reads very crisply. The language doesn't seem anachronistic or outdated or anything like that. So it works very, very well. The other thing, and I think this is perhaps the main thing that really struck me about this book as a difference between this and the domestic suspense books that I've read that have been published more recently, is that Highsmith chooses Vic as the central character rather than Melinda. So you can imagine in most of those modern books, the focus is on the female character and her plight and the situation she finds herself in and how she tries to get herself out of those situations. Now, interestingly, Gone Girl is an exception to that, and Gone Girl is the modern one that I've read that I really liked. So in Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn gives equal weighting to the male and female members of the couple. So maybe, and interestingly enough, the Kindle edition that I've got of Deepwater has an afterword by Gillian Flynn. So she was clearly a big Highsmith fan. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's something about twisting things on their head. So you expect in a suspense novel for the focus really to be on the victim, on the person who is in danger, who's in peril. And the fact that Vic is the central character of this in terms of driving the action along is really interesting. So he feels like the protagonist, even though he's like, the more evil of the 2 characters. He feels like the protagonist in many ways rather than the antagonist. And the book is almost set up like that he because the book is written from his perspective and he is the character. So it's not written in the first person, but he is, definitely the central character. And he's the one, he feels aggrieved because of what Melanie is doing. Now, she's doing the things that she's doing because of the lack of attention he shows her in their marriage. So it's kind of a vicious circle, but he feels aggrieved because of that, and therefore feels justified in the actions that he takes. And Melanie is almost set up as the antagonist, as the person who's trying to prevent him from getting the satisfaction that he wants. So it's a weird twist on the way things are normally set up in books like this. And I think as a result, it's really incredibly effective. And it helps that Vic is a fantastically weird character. He's really, really intriguing as a character. He seems to be, he's probably asexual, I would say. And Highsmith seems to like writing, or to have liked writing about characters who are, definitely outside of the norm. So the character of Bruno, who I talked about, I did my review of her book Strangers on a Train, I did a few weeks ago. Bruno is clearly gay, and Highsmith herself was a lesbian. So she seems to be attracted to writing about characters who are kind of outside the norm of society. And to an extent, Melanie is as well, in her, her constant affairs set her apart from the other female characters in the book who are, more monogamous. But Highsmith does such a great job of writing these kind of sociopathic characters that you really get sucked into their world and their way of thinking. And that makes for a tremendously tense and interesting and exciting book. So once again, I'm coming to you to recommend Patricia Highsmith. She really is something very special. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. I've actually showed this book quite recently on the channel, so it's a bit of a cheat, but it's such a lovely book, and it's so fitting for the subject of today's video. I couldn't resist it. So it's women crime writers, 4 suspense novels from the 1950s. So a lovely Library of America edition, which has in it The Blunderer by Patricia Highsmith, which I've talked about on the channel recently, Mischief by Charlotte Armstrong, which is another fantastic suspense novel which I read a few years ago, Beast in View by Margaret Miller, which I haven't got to yet, but I'm really looking forward to because it's supposed to be amazing, and Fool's Gold by Dolores Hitchens. So I do really love these Library of America editions. They're beautifully made. The pages just feel silky smooth. They're a delight to hold and read. Really nicely put together. They really do feel like a quality item. And whilst they're quite expensive, they're actually also good value for money, I think, because they're books that feel like they will last forever, but also you get multiple volumes in each book. So, this one I think was about £20, which sounds like a lot, but you get 4 books, so it's £5 each. So actually, that's not a bad deal. So yeah, definitely recommend, as well as recommending Patricia Highsmith, I definitely recommend these Library of America books. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you're a fan of Patricia Highsmith. Let me know if you like domestic suspense novels. Let me know your favourites that you think I might enjoy. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.